That's the tribe that's later on set apart to do special tasks in the tabernacle where the people of Israel worshipped God. And we know that he's got a brother called Aaron and a sister called Miriam. And we know that he's the son of Amram and the son of Jochebed. And we're told, funny wee detail, his mother saw that he was a father, or some translations say he was an unusual child, and that she hid him for 3 months. Now, it can't have been easy to hide a baby for 3 months. Babies are and babies are wriggly, and babies are smelly as well sometimes. So hiding a baby couldn't be easy. But in the current time, when Pharaoh's ordered that all the Hebrew baby boys have to be put into the river, Jochebed is doing everything to protect her baby. And I wonder if she actually may be discerning something of God's bigger purposes for him, even at this stage. As well as probably like any mum does baby and thinking, oh, isn't he just lovely? Look how fine he is, look how great he is. Because that would be normal enough too. But you see, if we jump forward into Acts chapter 6, the New Testament, Stephen there is making a speech to the Sanhedrin. And he also tells us that Moses was a child. So there was a wee baby. Just something about him. And it doesn't tell us why people knew that. But it is obviously something that for thousands of years has become part of the history of who Moses is. And his mother takes a risk in defying the orders of Pharaoh because he's ruthless. So if this wee baby's discovered, it probably will result in more than just the wee baby losing his life. Moses is born in a family who fear the Lord in a good way. They are in awe of God Almighty, much more than the people around them, the ruling people of the day. And again, jumping into the New Testament, Hebrews 11:23 says, by faith, Moses' parents hid him because they saw that he was a new child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. When Jochebed could hide him no was about 3 months old. She prepared a basket made of papyrus plants, big long leaves of plants that grow by the edge of the river. And they would be woven together and coated in pitch to seal the outside so that it was made waterproof. Placed it with her wee baby boy inside in the river. Literally, she was doing what God said. She was putting him in the river. But there was a creativity to what she was doing. And she obviously was fearing the Lord as well, more than what the Pharaoh had said. So she created as safe a little place as she could for her baby boy. And you know, even today, there are plenty of them that make boats out of reeds, and they sail them and they go off sailing up lakes and rivers. I was in one once when I was in Bolivia, and there's a lake there that borders Bolivia and Peru, and that was how people traveled. They went out to the islands in reed boats. And I was in one day. We went out to take Bibles to a little island where people didn't have any. I remember thinking, like, it was a bit scary. Swimming's not my best thing. I'm not a great swimmer. But, and in the days when there was no health and no life jackets around, it was kind of, and it tipped about a bit. But you can see pictures of them if you Google it, big long reed boats. And there would have been 7 or 8 of us in this particular boat. So obviously Moses wasn't, as a wee baby, wasn't going to be conscious of that. But there would be a lot of movement with it. And that, I guess, with a baby is either going to settle you down or disturb you, depending on the time of day and whether you're hungry and all those things. But experience, this is a literal Moses basket for this wee baby, and it is a safe place for him, we're to find out. But I wonder what his mother had in her mind when she did this for Moses. I wonder, in their context, was God saving people from other dangerous waters through a big container, very much in her heart. She heard the stories. Of course, in Genesis, there's a story where God rescues his people from danger through flood and through rains. And the interesting thing is, when I was doing a wee bit of study into this passage, the word that's used to describe that big container is ark. And it's exactly the same word that's used here in Exodus, and it's the only other time outside of the book of Genesis that this word is used in Scripture. So this is like a little tiny ark. And I wonder, is she hoping and has she got faith that her wee son is going to be safe in this? Because she knows, she's heard the story of what God did before. So I'm sure she's really hoping and praying and trusting that God's going to do the same thing again. And not only that, she places the baby in the River Nile, but she doesn't just kind of put it in the river and send it off like you might. Kind of sets it among the reeds, where the reeds are going to be a little bit of a barrier, big tall plants that grow on the river side, so that he's not just going to go down the Nile, but probably those reeds are going to keep him at a slower or a steadier pace. And I wonder as well, have maybe and his sister been watching and seeing that there's a bit of a pattern? Now, I don't know, this is just what maybe. I wonder, did Pharaoh's daughter, who comes along, come walking along the riverbank roughly the same time most days or on particular days, and did she know that, and did she hope maybe that Pharaoh's daughter would see the basket? Or maybe she was hoping Pharaoh's daughter wouldn't see the basket. I don't know, but I don't know what was going through her mind, but it must have been really, because Moses' mother has to let go of her own precious little one. She has to release the basket, and that must have been awful. So she's letting go out of her hands, and she's trusting her precious one into God's. And then his sister stands nearby to see what's going to happen. Maybe his mum couldn't face that. I don't know. I wonder tonight, is there something, or maybe someone precious to you that you need to release into God's hand? Because maybe there's nothing more that you can actually do in that situation except release them and trust God. And maybe even release them into the care of someone else who's going to be watchful over them, whether that's in prayer or literally. But it might be that that's something that we think about tonight. So Moses' sister is watching as Pharaoh's daughter and her entourage come along the riverbank, and they're coming to do the bathing ritual. But the daughter sees the basket. And we don't know at this stage whether there's noise coming from it, whether she's crying, whether she just doesn't know what's in the basket. But she's curious enough that she sends some of the people who are with her to go and get the basket. And when she opens it up and she recognizes that it's one of these little Hebrew baby boys, and she hears him crying, she's moved. Because we're moved when we hear people's cries, aren't we? Moses' big sister doesn't miss the moment. She's right in there when this happens, and she boldly steps up and she offers a suggestion. Pharaoh's daughter, again, risking her own safety to do that. And so she offers to go and find a Hebrew woman who can look after the baby for Pharaoh's daughter. And that goes against Pharaoh's orders. So even Pharaoh's daughter is putting herself at risk. Risk in this story, and a lot of risk by females as well. But I guess God is sovereign, and when he's at work in situations, even when we don't really know the outcome, but we can hope for things, God already has his people in the right place. And so Pharaoh's daughter agrees to this, and not only does Moses' sister go and get Moses' sister to look after him, but she gets paid for it as well. Now you couldn't, you wouldn't write that in yourself. It's amazing. So Moses' mother gets her baby returned to her to look after, and with pay. And Pharaoh, without any knowledge of, ends up supporting one of those hoping to wipe out, which is a wee bit ironic. See, the baby that's drawn out from the reeds that day, one day it's going to be the very that God uses to lead the exodus of his own people out of danger in Egypt. Although people aren't aware at this moment, but God knows that that's what's about to happen. And so at a future time, Moses is released, time, Pharaoh's daughter, and this time to be taken into the care of life in the palace, and that can't have been easy. But I wonder by this point, do Moses' parents have such a sense of purpose about their son and such trust in God that they're willing that they don't try to flee with him or make off with him, but they return him as they've said they will. Trust in that God's going to work his purposes out, even though they don't understand. And the lovely thing is that Moses' early formative years have been spent with his own blood family, with those he loved, hearing about the God of Israel, the God of the Bible. He has, with that sense of trust being put into him from his early years. And that's part of his formation for what he's to do in the future. And for those of us who have children, work with children, know children, volunteer with children, anything to do with children, we get to be part of formation for them. It's really, really important what we tell our children and what we model to them. It's hugely significant because it stays and it forms part of their identity. And it's significant for them into their future as well as in their present. But this deep sense of loyalty to God that Moses has retained, up with, even when growing up into his later years of growing up in Pharaoh's palace, is about to get in trouble. Because one day when Moses is out and he recognizes the oppression that his own people are under and the mistreatment, one day when he sees them at hard labor, he steps in to rescue a fellow Israelite who's being beaten by an Egyptian. And Moses, who thinks in that moment that nobody can see, nobody's watching, he strikes the oppressor, buries the body. And the next day, when he sees two of his own people, two of his own Hebrew people fighting each other, he intervenes and he challenges the aggressor. But the unexpected happens. You see, he doesn't know that somebody has seen what he's done the day before, and he's suddenly outed for his actions that previous day. And this challenges him in verse 14, "Who made you ruler and judge over us?" And the irony is that's one of the things that Moses was called to do by God. That is part of Moses' calling. And again, skipping forward to Acts 7, which is in it in the New Testament, it says this: he saw that one of his fellow Israelites was being mistreated, so he went to his defense and he avenged him. And it says this: Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they didn't. They didn't. So Moses strikes a blow for the oppressed, but he's acting a bit see, because he's stepping out in his own initiative. And again, the New Testament, Hebrews 11:24 says that by faith Moses decided to identify people rather than with the Egyptians, and with all the prestige and the opportunity that had given him growing up in the palace, he was hated by his own people. Moses assumed that they'd understand that the Lord was going to use him to deliver them from the oppressor. They didn't see it, and they didn't recognize it. Maybe that reminds us a wee bit of someone as well who wasn't recognized by his own to deliver them and rescue them. Thinking of Jesus there. But, it is so, so important we grow as Christians. We grow to recognize God's timing in our lives for things. And we need to keep in step with the Spirit of God and not run ahead and not overreach where we're at the moment, because the Lord's time is often at a much slower pace than what we use. Even if we have a sense of something that we're to do, often our timing is a bit askew. He's in no rush, whereas often we are in a big rush. And it's very hard if you see something not to want to know, isn't it? But actually, in God's plans, often you get a sense of something. But there's a formation, there's a preparation to be done before you're ready to do that. Not always, but a lot of the time. And here's the thing. Because we have the benefit of Scripture and reading back and hindsight, Moses at this stage of his life is about 40 years old. He's got to wait another 40 years before he gets to lead the Exodus. Most of us run out of patience in a few years, don't we? We think if we've been doing something for a few years, we're all set up to govern the world. That's not usually how it works in the Bible. And it's not usually how it works in life in general. It takes time to be formed into the person God wants you to be. And Moses fears reprisal when the word gets about to what he's done, you see. And intends again to kill Moses for the second time. So Moses runs away, this time to the land of Midian. And things aren't looking too well. He leaves the royal palace and he leaves the throne and he leaves all the treasures and the prestige that would have had. And he lands in a really humble place, a dry place where he'll stay for a long, long time before he's ready to do what God's asked him to do and called him to do. God's way doesn't tend to shoehorn us into position after a little bit of time. It's something that is in a way that we would never choose, because that's just not how we like to do things. But if we move too early, it can be catastrophic as well. So we need to know God's timing. And Moses believed that any chance that he would have had to deliver his own people is over now. Maybe it's not going to happen anymore because he's really blown it big time. Something terrible. But sometimes God allows us to go through multiple preparations. We think of we've been through one big thing or a few little things that we're all ready to go, but as often God, it's constant and it's ongoing. And God leads most specific family at a specific time. And that's all part of the process he's using to get Moses ready. Moses ends up in Midian, a dry, unpopulated place, not like the Nile Delta where there would have been green things and fruits and fabulous foods and things, even though it was a place of... But here's an interesting thing. Moses goes to Midian and he sits by a well. And that really jumped out at me this week. See, if you're wandering about in a dry place, and some of you will be, some of us will be, you find a well, and you just sit down at the well. If you can't try and find a river. If you can't get the river, find a well. Find the source of water, because that's where you'll survive. That's where you'll thrive. And I don't know what that looks like for you, but you need to find a well if you're in a dry place, because you're not going to make it if you don't. And God outworks his purposes in Moses' life, and as he takes on the purposes of God, one of the things that keeps coming up is Moses keeps needing to find water, and he keeps needing to be able to provide other people with water, lead them to water. And Moses is learning this. He's learning the importance of this in the early stages. Nothing's wasted. With the Lord, nothing is wasted. He uses everything, if we allow him to work out his bigger purposes. The process is, don't try and skip that. There's no shortcuts. You just have to go through what it is that God is leading you through. And it's to get to the end goal, because the process in itself is about life with him and listening to him and hearing from him and being led by him. In this place again, Moses comes to the rescue of those being mistreated. And the father of the family, Reuel, or as we'll later know him, probably his priestly name, feeds him and takes him in, and Moses marries one of his daughters, Zipporah, and they begin their own family. And it says in verse 21, was one of the translations says, content to live with this man. So about 360 miles away from Egypt, 40 years in a dry place, away from the palace, under his father-in-law, training, being hidden away in obscurity and away from any limelight and away from any royal processions and prestige. And it's in that God continues to form him into readiness to confront the superpower of the day and to lead his people out of slavery. Moses was to live under a priest and to do the work of a shepherd, because that's what they did in Midian. And in this humble state, he learns more about becoming a shepherd and being a shepherd. And he's going to need that when he leads the Exodus. See, God's presence is not his own self-promotion or his own time. And we read at the end of the chapter that we've just read in verse 23, during this long period, the king of Egypt died. Now that doesn't bode well, because we know from the first verse, chapter 1, and that with the passing of time and the new king who comes to power, they tend to forget the good things from before. And there's no connections and no relationships from that. And things can get worse. And this happens again. But what's going to happen next? Well, in this instance, in verse 23, the Israelites in their slavery cried out, and their cry for help, because of their slavery, it says, went up to God. And God heard their groaning, and he remembered his agreement, his pact with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob. See, God doesn't forget. Pharaohs forget, and human pharaohs forget. But God doesn't. Verse 25, so God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Such a long, long time of waiting for something to happen and for something to change. Hundreds of years, several generations, groaning under oppression and crying out to God. And sometimes we're better at the groaning, aren't we, than the crying out to God. We're good at the moaning and the groaning sometimes, but we're not always good at asking him for his help and his intervention. Like even the human heart of Pharaoh's daughter was moved at the cry of that wee baby in the reeds. God hears. His heart is moved and he's concerned for the people. He hears and he remembers his agreement with Abraham and to Abraham's descendants. And you know, God's plan has always been about the rescue and the delivery of us out of slavery. Has always been what's been in his heart. He's not forgotten. He hears and he's concerned. What's this going to move him to do now? Well, we need to wait to find out the next bit of the story that involves Moses, but you know, the cry of human hearts in their slavery to sin and to the kingdom of darkness has already God's heart. He has already provided over many human generations multiple rescuers at times through the human beings he has raised up to rescue at different times. And beyond that, he sent another wee baby who was unique and not ordinary to rescue us once and for all. Jesus. So that we can be restored, rescued out of slavery and restored into that closeness again that we were always meant to have with the God who made us. The great rescue has already begun. It's underway. And for those of us who've already said yes to Jesus, he's working that out for us. And for those who haven't, tonight be a great night to do that, so that you can be part of the rescue as well. Because that's always been God's heart. To set us free, to keep us close. In a few moments, we're going to celebrate together. And maybe as we come to that table and that place this evening, God will speak into your heart as you've been hearing things from his word. And it'll be personal to you because he is personal like that. But maybe there are things, hiding wrong things. Moses thought no one saw and he hid the evidence. That's not living in freedom. Just wonder if someone's going to out you. And if you are worrying tonight, if something's been simmering, if you're worried about that tonight, then it's the time to let go of that, to just say you're sorry to God, ask for forgiveness, and let him wipe it out so that you can move on. And you're not enslaved by that fear of someone putting it out there, what you did. It's about God's timing tonight, because God's timing is incredibly important. And sometimes we get that wrong because we sense of something, and we don't care who's in the way, we'll knock them out of the way so we can outwork his purposes in our lives. God doesn't bless that, and we need to allow him to form us. Or maybe it's that willingness to sit by the well, find that in the maybe it's a resolve to do that. Or a willingness to be unknown, to be tucked away, so his work. Even though that means that no one gets to appreciate how wonderful we are in this moment. And maybe that'll become more, it'll be more about who he is than what we could do for him. I don't know, but I'm sure that the Spirit of God has been breathing on his word. He's been speaking to us. I know he was speaking to me as I was getting ready for this evening. But we are going to move into a time of thanking him and celebrating the great rescue around the table of Holy Communion. So can I ask Gillian to come and lead us for that part?